Well, welcome everyone. My name is Bree Norton. I'm from Aussie Way, and we are here today to talk about the Accessibility Toolkit and the future of this toolkit and the gaps that are missing. I have some interesting people to join me on this panel today from Australia, and we hope to share a little bit more about the content of the Accessibility Toolkit and where we can see it going in the future. So to get us started, I'm going to do an acknowledgement of country, which we do here in Australia. And I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, and pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. My colleague Ben and I are on Ngunnawal land, and I will ask our panelists to share the land on which they pay respects as part of their introduction. As I said, my name is Bree Norton, and I'm a digital strategist and user experience and accessibility specialist based in Canberra, Australia. I've been involved in the accessibility community for quite a few years and the conference convener of the AussieWay.org conference. I'm also a panel member of the Standards Australia Committee for Accessible ICT Procurement, and I'm also on the Research Ops Community Cheese Board. I'm now going to introduce you to my other panelists. Please welcome Greg Eltran, who will do his introduction first.
Thank you, Bree. My name is Greg Eltran. I'm the Principal Accessibility Specialist at Service New South Wales. I'm meeting you today on Wiradjuri land, so I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging as well. For me, disability is a lived experience. My left eye, I'm legally blind, and sorry, my right eye, I'm legally blind. I'm blind in my left eye. It's actually a prosthesis. I'm also certified by both Apple and Microsoft as an accessibility specialist. Thank you, Bree.
Excellent. And now I'd like to go to Andrew Arch.
Yes, I'm Andrew Arch, and I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. I've been in the digital accessibility space for over 2 decades now. I'm currently a principal consultant with a small firm called Intopia, but previously I've worked at the Digital Transformation Agency and with the World Wide Web Consortium looking at accessibility for older people. I also chair Standards Australia IT 40 Committee on ICT Accessibility, and this committee completed the adoption of the European standard EN 301549 in 2016, and we updated that when the Europeans updated their standard to incorporate WCAG 2.1 in 2020. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, and we'll go to Ben Leach. You're on mute, Ben.
Somebody had to do it. Hi, I'm Ben Leach. I work for the Digital Transformation Agency in the federal government as a policy and architecture lead. As mentioned by Bree, I am on Ngunnawal land, and I echo her in passing on my respect to the traditional custodians. The particular lens that I bring to the conversation is an interest in the application of accessibility requirements and policies in government procurement practices. I've worked in government for over 15 years between the Department of Finance and the Digital Transformation Agency, and I have a passion for accessibility and inclusivity.
Thank you so much, Ben. Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, and I'm just going to give a very brief summary of the Accessibility Toolkit. So in support of the South Australia's Disability Inclusion Act in 2018, the Government of South Australia worked with leading industry experts, people with lived experience of a disability, members of the community, all levels of government here in Australia, and representatives from the US, UK and Canadian governments to co-design South Australia Government's new online accessibility policy and online accessibility toolkit. We will have the link to that toolkit in the transcript on the YouTube page. It is a dual category winner at the first Australian Access Awards in 2019 and finalist at the Australian Human Rights Awards 2019. Accessibility.sa.gov.au is designed to be a community-driven resource, helping everyone build better digital products and services by making digital platforms more accessible. So that's the introduction for the Accessibility Toolkit. There is a session on after hours that will go into more detail by the Government of South Australia. But now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the gaps in the toolkit, and particularly in this case about accessible ICT and procurement of ICT products and services. So I'm going to go next to Greg, who will talk to us about what the New South Wales is doing in this space, because there's already materials out there that we can utilise in our federal government processes. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Bree. So the New South Wales government several years ago was very excited by the work of Standards Australia in adopting the accessibility requirements standard. And what we've done is actually incorporated it into what's called By New South Wales. It is our procurement system that goes across the New South Wales government. And we've actually got a page which references some support materials for all government agencies on how to implement those accessibility standards in procurement. Now, some people have said that the a standard is a complex document. I actually don't think it is. I might be a strange breed. I think what it's about is looking at what are the key points and the key intent in there. And that's what we've put into our document. So it's looking at what are the things that need to be thought about before you start. And so from a tender perspective, you go, look, just like we're going to be doing privacy or security or anything else, that tender process still needs to be the same just because we're using the word accessibility. And that's what we've looked at, is how do we make it mainstream within that process? And looking at that advice is not a whole separate piece, but part of that ongoing procurement process. And we go, look, what are we going to do? We're going to have a piece about performance statement. We're going to be saying this is what we want our resource to do. We might put some additional requirements in there. We might also, as we've recommended, put a little payment clause in there as well. But we've got some clarity over what we want the product to do. And it would become just another business requirement along that procurement process. Now, this is absolutely crucial, the same as that we've added some material there around people about how do you consistently evaluate? What are some different tools and tips that you can do? It's not overthinking this. At times, yes, you're going to need an accessibility expert. You're going to need some advice, just like you would with privacy or security or any other matter. And so you go, situation normal here. I don't have the expertise in here. Let's bring somebody in to help us along this way. But it's having that clear, consistent approach. It was absolutely crucial for New South Wales to support this because we have, as our Premier's targets within New South Wales, where we're trying to double the number of people with disabilities employed within New South Wales government. We're recognising that the good procurement is a great enabler in not only being able to promote us as an inclusive employer and remove the barriers to employment. It also means when we have that correlation between ageing and disability, it means that we're able to more easily retain our existing staff as they may gain a disability as they age. So what it's about is buying smart so that you can, just like you personalise your driving position, you can now personalise your working position with the right technology. And that's what it's about. We know that it will save money. It'll allow us to reach a wider workforce, but it also means that it provides flexibility not only for people with a permanent disability, but people with a temporary or emerging disability. And so it becomes a really useful, simple strategy for us to put in place. Have we got it 100% right? No, we still need to do more work, because it's about how do we build that awareness and capacity within all the procurement teams about simplifying that process so it becomes business as usual. And that's ongoing work that we need to do in this space. But we recognise the value across the agency of making sure that we've all got the EN 301 standard adopted and implemented throughout our different agencies. Bree, across to you.
No, that's great, Greg. And I think, that we do have, as part of the Human Rights Commission work that you're doing as well, we know that there's a lot of compliance out there to be met. And what's probably missing is that information around how to meet it, the practical things. And what you've started in New South Wales has really started to look at that, which we're hoping to take a little bit further. But we might go to what is this standard? So we'll move on to Andrew Arch now, who will talk to us about the EN 301549 and how this is important for us in the government space.
Thanks, Bree. As I said in my introduction, Australia initially adopted the European standard EN 301549 back at the end of 2016. The Standards Australia IT 40 Accessible ICT Committee had looked at a number of standards around the world and settled on that one as the best one, most current one, most up-to-date and broadest one at that stage to adopt in Australia. Following that, when the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 were released, Europe adopted, upgraded their EN 301549 to include the new criteria from WCAG 2.1. And then at the end of 2020 in Australia, we adopted the updated European standard. I understand from the Europeans that they have a draft version in the back pocket, so to speak, for when WCAG 2.2 is released, hopefully in the middle of this year by the the Worldwide Web Consortium. And we will then look to adopt that. So end of this year, early next, we will probably have another update to the Australian standard AS EN 301549, just to keep abreast with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines updates that most Australian organisations and governments, if not required by policy, certainly seem to be adopting regardless as best practice. The EN 301549 has quite a number of sections. The really interesting one is the section on functional performance, where they present a number of functional performance statements about usage without vision, with limited vision, without perception of colour, etc., and include some areas that we often overlook, which is usage with limited manipulation or strength and usage with limited reach. And those two are particularly important when we think outside just what we're putting on the web or in an app, when we think about ICT hardware in particular that people are expected to interact with, such as a check-in screen at an airport, a directory screen in a large shopping centre, or even something like a multifunction printing device in an office where somebody in a wheelchair, for instance, might not be able to see that panel on top and what you need to do to be able to make sure that that might be accessible. So it goes beyond just what we see on the screen, but how we might interact with the hardware that the screen is presented in. So from my perspective, that's a really good move forward to broaden it from just the screen itself and how we're presenting that information for a variety of people with disability and interaction modes to the hardware that those screens are contained in. The other thing I will add to what Greg says was, a lot of ICT procurement has statements around privacy and around security, and we're not expecting the procurement officers to understand, the security technology or the privacy legal issues. As we bring accessibility into ICT procurement, we're not expecting the procurement officers to have a deep knowledge of what that might mean in terms of the screen presentation or the hardware configuration. But like they would go and consult with a specialist about the privacy and security issues, they should be able to go and consult with a specialist around the accessibility. And what has been asked for by somebody putting EN 301-549 into the procurement requirements. And there was something I was going to add to that, and I've probably forgotten it as I'm speaking here. We might come back to that. The other thing I was going to say is, as a digital accessibility consultant, we're finding that a lot of the private sector are also expressing interest in getting accessibility into their ICT procurement over the last few years. It's not, while it's a requirement of government, the private sector, the retail sector, or the large corporates that we've been working with have also said, how can we improve our procurement, primarily to better support their staff, but also to ensure that when they procure some ICT services, that is part of what they're looking for if they're going to develop, say, a new banking app or a new retail app or a fidelity app, whatever it might be. Bree, I'll stop there and we'll let Ben have a chat.
Before we get to Ben, so Greg put his hand up there, and I know that Greg needs to leave us for the moment. So would you like to jump in now, Greg?
Thank you kindly, Bree. I would just like to build upon Andrew's comment there and say, in that procurement process, where it's really crucial is in when we're buying online e-learning packages. And so it's not only just in that piece, this is where 301 and that connection with WCAG is absolutely crucial for us, because it means now we're making sure that we're buying staff development packages and other tools that all of our staff can participate with straight from the start. And it's that issue of equal access, and that comes back to our Human Rights Commission about our equal access to information and services. So they're all interlinking parts of the puzzle. And at the moment, we've got that partial missing link of our puzzle, and that's why we really want to work on how that can enhance the great work that has happened in the Accessibility Toolkit. Thank you, Bree.
Thanks, Greg. Well, we might move to Ben now to talk about the Digital Transformation Agency's procurement framework, because there are questions that are asked sometimes, where do I find resources? And maybe that is one place, but we've done a bit of discussion around that. So would you like to give us a background, Ben? And you are on mute, so just reminding you. Thanks.
Thanks, Bree. I always feel very grateful that I can join these types of calls with experts such as yourself, Bree, Andrew, and Greg. And I think there is so much that we can learn from actually sharing information in this space a lot better across jurisdictions, including international jurisdictions. So very happy to be part of this phone call. So the Digital Transformation Agency's procurement framework was developed with references to the public procurement policy adopted by Standards Australia in March 2017, being ASEN 301-549, and it ensures that the Commonwealth procurement requirements specifically reference accessibility within the procurement rules. Since it's become part of our policy framework, it's become clear that that's not quite enough. So to Greg and Andrew's points about incorporating accessibility by default into the way that the government operates, we have tried in the Digital Transformation Agency to do that on behalf of our customer government agencies by rolling those requirements into what we refer to as whole of government coordinated procurements. So we can do that once on behalf of government and service many, many agencies with technologies and services that have been tested for those key requirements that we like to test against. What we also think this does is it gives us the chance to call in expertise, which we know can be hard to find at certain times, and use that expertise to benefit more Australian government agencies in one hit. We don't think that's the end of what we need to do better. And we still need to help educate the agencies on the implementation of these technologies and the ongoing delivery of accessible products and services to their users, be that other government employees or the citizens that we service. So there is a huge amount of work to be done. And we think the toolkit that is being developed is well positioned to be a good piece of that work.
Excellent.
I think I'll hand back to you, Bree.
No, that's great. Thanks, Ben. With the procurement framework, we've talked about this before, that there's a lot of information in there for procurement officers, and it does reference EN 301549 and WCAG, but probably doesn't give that practical advice. We talked about that could go into the accessibility toolkit. How do you plan to kind of reference that? How do you think we should reference that in the framework itself? How would you like to envisage that happening?
That's correct. There is a lot more detail that we think agencies would benefit from in terms of practical guidance on how to incorporate accessibility into their procurement activities. The thing that we need to remember is that not every procurement undertaken by a government agency is conducted by a procurement specialist. Yeah. That a lot of the things that are really impactful in terms of citizen engagement are being purchased by project officers, leading specific pieces of work. So what we need to do is help agencies uplift their procurement practices to make sure that accessibility is by default within their standards and their templates. And then we need to provide that more granular level detail guidance within the toolkit to those agencies who are buying at the point of time where they're buying. How we think we need to do it, we want to build on the work that's already been done. New South Wales government, unfortunately Greg's just dropped off, but is well ahead in some of these areas. And we understand there are some great templates for assessing accessibility within procurement activities that already exist. We'd like to see those leveraged and built upon, and have a nice program of work designed around the upkeep of that work as well.
No, that's great. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Andrew?
No, just that there are a couple of other organisations, Melbourne University, for instance, come to mind, that have some materials in public space to help guide this process. They've put it out particularly from a tertiary education perspective, but it's not just the government sector that is working on this in Australia, which is really great to see from an accessibility perspective.
No, that's great. And also just from our Aussie Way point of view and the work that we're doing at the moment with state government departments as well, is to build on that content in the accessibility toolkit where the gaps are, and procurement is one of those gaps. We've started doing some workshops around that space with different types of audiences. So for the forum here, if you are, interested in being involved in those workshops, please reach out to us at aussieway.org, and we'll look to get you involved in the workshops that we're doing. We'll also be sharing some of the findings and the results and discussions from procurement in our aussieway.org forums. So we will share more of those in the YouTube recording transcript as well. I might just go to another question now to both of you. We'll start with you, Ben, maybe. Who should champion or advocate for accessible ICT procurement in an organisation?
That is a great question. The answer should be everybody, of course. Where we think the levers are, the greatest levers to implement these changes would be with the procurement functions themselves by building these changes into the standard operating model of their agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we need to get to implement accessible by default purchasing. This cannot be a bolt-on that a user would need to add to a process late in the piece. This needs to be fundamental to the way we consider how we purchase things as a government, the same way it is in how we build services as a government using human-centered design. So I do think the procurement officers have a great responsibility here, but a great opportunity to do something really meaningful.
No, that's great. Andrew, would you like to add to that at all?
No, Ben's pretty right. It is everybody. When we're talking about accessibility, we once upon a time used to digital accessibility, the screen-based stuff. We used to say that, or people took it for granted that it was the developer, but these days we say it's also the content writer, also the designer, also the product owner who might be, and the business analyst who might be putting together the case for building something. Everybody's got a role to play, and when it comes to ICT procurement, it's not just the procurement officer, but the people that they're working with, the organisation, making sure that it is part of their key requirements, that they're addressing the requirements of people with disability, both through internal purchase requirements for software, hardware, and other things, as Greg mentioned, e-learning and other types of products as well. And the same applies to purchasing stuff that might be being put into public space, like that check-in terminal or the FPOS machine or whatever it might be.
Yeah, excellent. And I think something that we've discussed in these forums and these workshops is also the checking, the ongoing checking of something that could be customized once it's been purchased as well. So Ben, how do you see that as being important in the procurement framework? Where do we kind of bring in those check-ins as well? We've discussed that before. Would you like to share that with our hopefully our viewers?
Very much so. In the procurement framework that has been published by the DTA, we do talk about the service life cycles or product life cycles. And that is a really key point, that buying something that is out of the box accessible can be implemented in a way that is not accessible. And that is something that we need to help educate users across the organization of what that means. I think it is a challenge to tackle that in a single area of a government agency. So this is where procurement does hand over some of the control to internal ICT enablement teams.
Yes.
To monitor and ensure that the implementation of these products and services doesn't take away from the hard work of some of our vendors in building something that is accessible out of the box. Where that advice to agencies sits, I think, will be a challenge for all different agencies to implement as well. We do think that there is an opportunity within advice going out on government architecture to incorporate references to this. And we will continue to represent the accessibility standard within the digital service standard. And we think they're two leverage points, but there needs to be many more that we haven't discovered yet.
That's great. And hopefully we'll get that from our workshop activities as well, that as we develop that content. I'm going to finish off with a final question. And this is around the options of limited number of vendors of specialized ICT software, where they may not meet the accessibility required for that product. How would you expect that we should work with them? Ben, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, I think this is another really key lesson that we need to take into our procurement areas to build the right protections and the right triggers to work with our providers to make sure that we're building out the solutions that we thought we were building out. We don't want to go stick only with this. We do need to have some carrots for those sellers who are doing the right things and looking after Australian government interest, and promoting those sellers who are providing accessible goods and services proactively to government and outside of government as well. I think that is a lever that we should be looking at. Rewarding good behaviour in this space, I think, is key, rather than chasing everybody down with a compliance stick. I'm sure Andrew will agree and have some additional points to add on to that as well.
Yes, coming in there, I think that, if there are limited vendors and, I'm not aware of any product that is 100% accessible to 100% of the audience. Lots of organisations that are providing ICT solutions are trying very hard these days. And I think what we need to do when we're looking at the procurement is say, okay, does it meet the corporate needs of the organisation, be it a government department or a private sector organisation? And what are they doing about accessibility? What is their roadmap for improving the accessibility over time is one thing that we can definitely look at in terms of saying, okay, so we know you've got some gaps in your accessibility. It's not going to meet the needs of this group or fully meet the needs of another group. But what are your plans to improve that over time? And it's actually interesting, Ben, a couple of times in the last 12 or 18 months, we've been actually asked to partner with some organisations who have to address for government procurement to say, okay, how can we, what can we do as an organisation? Where are our gaps in terms of meeting the requirements of a government procurement? And I think organisations that are providing ICT solutions are actually, as a result of the work of government in particular, paying a lot more attention now to accessibility for people with disabilities than they were even 5 years ago when I was working with you and Bree on some of this stuff in Canberra. So it's really interesting to see the how accessibility is being taken up more broadly across the breadth of ICT products out there, and very, very pleasing. And as I said, what we need to be looking at for those organisations that meet our meet the requirements of the software product or the hardware product is what are their plans for the future for those areas that they don't meet the accessibility requirements.
That's great. And I think that kind of fits with the digital service standard as well, with that assessment approach. Even if you're not too sure that you are talking to all your end users or you're meeting all accessibility, as you said, what are you doing to plan towards that? So that's a really good aspect of it. So we might finish off there. I know we've got some workshops. We've got lots of information to share to the people that watch this discussion on the YouTube channel. Andrew, Ben, Andrew, would you like to finish off first? Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
No, just please take account of accessibility in your procurement in the same way that you take account of privacy and security. They should all be non-negotiable, but as we've said, nobody is perfect. You're going to have to work with the best provider to make sure that they continue the improvements over time.
Thanks, Andrew. And Ben?
I might finish by echoing one of the points that Greg made, that sometimes the requirement for a reasonable adjustment is a temporary one, and it could happen to any user at any time. So we need to be adaptable in our approach to accessibility, and we need to make sure that we are supporting all of our users to make sure we get the best out of them, and that they can get the best out of us. So make sure that flexibility is built in.
That's great. Thank you. And yeah, please visit us at aussieway.org, and we'll be sharing more information about the workshops on our forum. And I would love to thank our interpreters today, and thank the Zero Project and Digital Gap initiative for introducing us to each other. Thank you all.